Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. Before we get into today's show, I have an incredibly important announcement. This is something that I really haven't been more excited to announce than all the way back in 2014 when I first started the Energy Blueprint. After well over a year of development and testing, we are finally ready to officially launch our breakthrough mitochondrial supplement to the world. This is a genuine game changer in the area of human energy enhancement, and it's called Energenesis. This is actually the first no stimulant, no caffeine, and no sugar energy formula that actually builds up your own body's capacity to produce energy. Instead of working like caffeine and stimulants by giving you a temporary boost of energy for a few hours, but ultimately making your energy levels worse over time, Energenesis actually builds up your own body's ability, your cellular capacity to produce energy. Energenesis got over 20 amazing, powerful ingredients at real effective doses. This is a premium formula that uses actual real effective doses. So this is literally like 23 supplements all in one. And with that in mind, just to mention a few testimonials that people have wrote in after using Energenesis. So this one's from Barbara. She said, I'm a 72-year-old female and I love Energenesis. I have more sustained energy through the day and I'm actually getting my life back. I'm doing things that I haven't been able to do for 10 years. Anya, she said, I really love that it gives me just the right kind of steady and balanced energy. Unlike stimulants, which I can't tolerate, Energenesis gives me a perfect, smooth kind of energy that lasts throughout the whole day. Michelle Catlin, this is one of my favorite ones. She said, Ari, are you getting tired of all the praise and requests for Energenesis yet? I'm on my third bottle, and I have to tell you, I haven't felt this good in years. So if you've been struggling with your energy levels and you're looking to get this area of your life handled, and not just to get a temporary boost of energy for a few hours, but to actually transform your energy levels by building real energy at the cellular level, then go get yourself some Energenesis. You can get it at theenergyblueprint.com/Energenesis. So go to that page, check out all the ingredients and all the science behind it, how it works. It's all there. There's about 200 scientific references behind all of the different ingredients in Energenesis. They're all listed on that page along with a lot of the science behind the ingredients. There's also a video explaining it all. Check it all out. Check out the science, then grab yourself some Energenesis and let's get started. I know that you are going to be blown away by the result. The URL is theenergyblueprint.com/Energenesis. And now let's get into the episode. Hey there, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and with me now is my good friend, Dr. Brian Walsh, who is, I believe, on the podcast for the third time now. He is a biochemistry and physiology expert. He's a board-certified naturopathic doctor. And he's also become a personal friend of mine over the last couple of years. And I have really, through many personal conversations, as well as following his work, I've come to see him as really one of the most brilliant minds in the whole natural health and functional medicine space. The best way I can describe it is there are some practitioners who they go through their training, whatever school they go through that education, they go through whatever other training beyond that. And then they go into practice and they get in the groove of whatever their routines are and their specific protocols are. And they kind of just stay in that routine. And then there are other practitioners who just have an insatiable thirst for knowledge and who are constantly spending, hours and hours every single day digging into the latest science and who are just constantly on the cutting edge of very, very deep knowledge of the ins and outs. They're not just rehearsing, memorized protocols that they've done 1,000 times before, but they're constantly trying to pioneer new things, to think things through, to question the status quo, and do it on a high level with really, really sophisticated levels of scientific knowledge. And I really put Dr. Walsh in that category. So it is my pleasure to have you on for the third time, my friend.
All right, listen, I'm glad you're keeping track. I really appreciate that intro. It's great to see you again. The feelings are mutual. I will say though, as you were talking, if I may, I know that you're supposed to be interviewing me, but it just struck me as you were saying what you did about, this endless sort of pursuit of knowledge. And as I was thinking about it, there's a lot of practitioners that are in this constant pursuit of knowledge. But I think that what's important, and I'm not saying look at me in any particular way on this, but it's what's underneath that. Because I can tell you that there are people that they rip me off all the time. They're people in pursuit of knowledge to make themselves look better, to make themselves look smarter, to be more, let's just say like mentally bulletproof, so that if somebody came at them with some kind of argument against, whether vitamin D is good for you or not, that they had some really quick retort and were clearly intelligent and very articulate with the responses. As you were saying that, I have to say though, I asked myself really quickly, like, yeah, why the heck do I care so much about knowing all this darn stuff? And it truly is. I had this own little conversation in my head as you were introducing me. I'm sorry. It's to help other people, though. I mean, it's to find the truth. Quite honestly, it's the truth as much as science will allow us to find, so that we as practitioners are not misleading people as to what health is.
Yeah.
And that we as patients, because we're all patients and people as well, are not misguided as to, again, what health actually is. And so I do have this, I can't stop learning about this stuff, whether I did what I'm doing right now or not. Like, it's fascinating. But it's not the knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's the knowledge for the pursuit of truth. And it's the pursuit of truth so that I have the ability to help people, like really help people, not just, follow this fad diet right now and take this fancy supplement because it's the one everybody's talking about. But really deep down, it's actually not going to get you well. And I think everybody knows that until the next big thing comes along. So anyways, I had that insight as you were saying it. Sorry to cut you off at the very beginning of your own interview.
No, that was great. And
I think that's an important piece.
I there might be another element to it. I agree with everything you said, but I will also say from my own personal experience, and I think I would guess that you're probably similar to me in the sense, from the time I was a young kid, 13 years old, I've been studying this stuff, nutrition, physiology, and I studied it for 10 years, 15 years before I ever made a dime on my knowledge. And I spent hours and hours and hours every day studying it just because I was fascinated with it. I developed a passion and obsession with it. And then when I started using that knowledge to help people, then it became even more addicted and I became even more passionate and obsessed about it. And I think from hearing your story, I think you kind of had similar,
yeah, man. I mean,
early upbringing to me in regard to your relationship.
Yeah, I think we talked about that before. I was a Boy Scout, and I got Boys Life magazine, which it came with Boy Scouts, I guess. And they had those Charles Atlas comics, where the kid gets the sand in his face. And I saved up cash, sent cash through the mail, got this thing. And I'm sitting here, I don't know, 10 years old, 12 years old, doing these isometric exercises, in front of my mirror. And I got, believe it or not, I'm not that old, man, but like, apparently I am. I don't know. One of those band things, not the bands, but with the springs, those things?
Yeah.
Good Lord. And like you do it around your back and then it'd pinch your skin on the way back. And then I got a pair of 10-pound dumbbells. That was like my big thing. And I'm just sitting here exercising like crazy. And I bought a nutrition book. I think before I could drive, I was reading what my mom was driving around. So yeah, like, just fascinated with this human experience, and whether it's fitness or nutrition, that's kind of that's like the gateway, right? That's what gets you into this. And the next thing you know, you might, I don't know, read up on the more esoteric stuff, and whether it's like chakras and essential oils, or there's the mind body connection and then meditation. And it's just this like never ending path of, but yeah, before you made a dime on it, then you become a trainer, and it's like all this education you've amassed just out of interest. And then all of a sudden you're a trainer and you're like, wow, I can actually apply this stuff and help people. And then nutrition. And then, for me, naturopath or massage therapist or whatever it is. It's kind of a cool journey for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to come back to something you said in passing there that I think is important. You mentioned the pursuit of this knowledge for truth, for helping people, for wanting to be as close to the truth as possible so that you help people and don't mislead people. And I think there's almost there's a point at which practitioners diverge in the sense that there's a marketing pull towards positioning your brand, positioning yourself as, hey, I've got this unique diet, I've got the magic macronutrient ratio and the magic foods of my diet that will help you lose 27 pounds in 13 days or whatever. And so there's this from a marketing perspective, there's a pull in that direction towards misrepresenting things for the sake of selling and making money.
Yep.
On the other hand, there's a pull, at least for some people, to high integrity, to honesty, to integrity, and to truth, to wanting to dig obsessively into the science to get as close to the truth, to question the status quo, to hopefully help people as best as possible and to not mislead them. And, you know, I was listening to one of your recent interviews recently, and you said something like, what was it? How can we be so confident that we are doing things right now, that we know the truth, that, you know, keto and intermittent fasting and whatever else is the right way, when we've been wrong so much in the past?
Listen, you know,
so can you elaborate on that?
I'd love to. I would love to. So, you know, I speak or I have spoken in front of large audiences of practitioners before. And there are certain things, you know this, there are certain things inside of you that you just like, you feel are so true. You just want to broadcast it out to the world. You're like, this is a truth. Like, let's really think about this. And I'll say certain things in these presentations, and I'll get all these nods and all these bits. When I talk about that part that you just said, which I'll definitely go into because I feel strongly about this, I don't get a lot of head nods. And I don't know why. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, if there's one thing we must embrace, must acknowledge, must realize, is that I personally think that we as a human race, I mean, we think that we're so far evolved because we have opposable thumbs and can think and speak and all these and communicate and all these things. I think we're mental idiots, quite honestly. Like, think about how many times in your personal individual past where you said, well, I thought that was a good idea at the time, or oops, I messed up, or I've been wrong way more times than I've been right in my life. I've been right before, but man, I think I'm wrong far more often. What is that? That shows you how fallible our minds are. So this is yeah. So I give that little preview to this because, like, I wonder why more people don't talk about this very thing. And that is that you can go back, first of all, into any industry. It doesn't matter. Science is an easy one. Politics, really. You can go into any one of them. And at the time, people were so certain of certain things. Just choose the time period, man. Like, you can go to the 50s, you can go to 1900, you go to the 1700s. It doesn't matter. Choose the time period and look at the narrative that they were telling about the body, how it worked, or certain things. And it wasn't hypothesis. It was like, this is the truth. And, you know, one of the classic examples was pellagra. Pellagra is a niacin deficiency, we now know. And so, and I try to never say we now know, because it's a belief. And all it is we used to think this, and now we think this. We don't know this. And in fact, there's guru practitioners in the industry that say, well, we used to think this, but now we know. I'm like, you're as dumb as a bag of tacks, man. Like, we don't know. I don't think much of anything. We think a lot of things. We believe a lot of things that will probably be disproven. If we're not, then maybe we were right, but it doesn't mean we know anything. So pellagra back then was sure that it was a black fly bite, that the black fly caused pellagra. And there's newspaper articles written on this, and they said, if we can eradicate the black fly, we will eradicate pellagra. That was the narrative. And turns out it was a niacin deficiency. And that's all it was. And so then I ask practitioners today, without trying to offend anybody, are there any infections today that we call an infection? Like, it might rhyme with lime, or rhyme, that we say is due to something. And I'm not picking on Lyme, but like, that there's a thing that we are pegging on a bug, a bacteria, or a parasite, or a thing, and we're wrong. And people are like, no, we have the science now. They had the science then. The same conversations that we have today, but we were so much more advanced in the science. Well, they were more advanced in the science back then too, previous to that. And so I don't like to say that history repeats itself, but, you know, if it's the interview I'm thinking you are mentioning, we talked about the billows, you know, and along the Thames River, and like where the phrase blow smoke up one's rectum came from. It's because they actually believed that if somebody had a near drowning experience, I think 1700s, that they would take one of those old billows that you would stoke a fire with, just with air, and they'd put smoke in it. Well, actually they'd put embers in it, and so that they would put it up someone's rectum and do that, and then that would revive them, because It happened to one lady, but it was probably because the hot embers up your rectum, you can imagine, would awake almost anybody from unconsciousness, like ammonia salts would too, right? But that was what they believed, and we look at that now, like, man, they're stupid, but let's go ahead and take, 40,000 IUs of vitamin D every single day by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look how stupid they were for using mercury therapeutically. Yeah, but let's go ahead and, strap on this whatever electronic gadget around our head while we're putting essential oils in our armpits or whatever it might be. I'm not trying to rip on anything in particular, but how can we think we are so stinking right about this? Oh, look how stupid we were in the 80s. Low fat. Pff, that was a mess. Clearly bathing yourself in lard every morning in the bathtub that's we need to. But and we're so, but I'll wrap this up to say we are so certain that we are right now. Mm-hmm. We were certain that we were right then too. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think there's enough people that are questioning themselves and the whole everything, like curcumin. Curcumin as a spice is really not bioavailable. Like, our body does not want to absorb much of that at all as a spice. Well, depending on your belief system and how long the world's been around and all these things, we've been evolving for a long time. Along with that, Mother Nature, whoever made this whole thing, maybe there's a reason why it's not very bioavailable. Mm-hmm. And yet we're practically injecting it into us by taking these nanoparticle micellized, special liposomal delivery. Let's load our bodies up with as much as it possibly can. And it might turn out that that's a brilliant idea. It might turn out that that's stupid. Mm-hmm. But you can't make all these curcumin for everybody. So it's a great question. We are so certain about things now, and we look back and think that we were stupid in the past. I guarantee you, people in the future will look back at what we're doing now and think that we're complete morons.
Yeah,
that we're doing in the health industry.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And on the note of, kind of a personal anecdote, you're talking about you being wrong so many times in the past. When I was younger, when I was in my, teens and 20s, I was hardcore, ultra dogmatic, totally convinced that the truth of nutrition and why people get fat, it's carbs. Yeah. Carbs cause a secretion of insulin, and insulin controls how fat you get because it's a fat storing hormone. And this made enormous amounts of sense to me. And, how could it not? Carbs boost insulin. Insulin is a fat storing hormone. Of course, that's what controls it. And in my late-ish 20s, there was a bunch of research that came out and has since come out and confirmed this over and over again, dozens of times, that carbs and insulin are not what regulate body fatness. Mm-hmm. And that you can put people on equivalent calorie diets that are either high or low carb and see the exact same amounts of fat loss or fat gain, depending whether you're underfeeding or overfeeding. And this has been replicated over and over again. And so I realized that, I had just spent so much time, lecturing people about this, telling everyone that this is the truth. This is what the science says. And I was absolutely wrong. And I was willing to accept that I was wrong. But there's a certain, as you are wrong multiple times like that, and you realize that you've misled people, hopefully you acquire some, I think two things. You acquire some humility, and you acquire kind of an obsession to want to dig deep, 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 and always question the fads and the status quo to make sure you're not being misled and sort of washed along with the flow of whatever's popular in the moment.
Totally. Humility is everything. I mean, you nailed it with humility. And I think that the problem that I see with a lot of practitioners today is, so listen, other examples are, you're supposed to eat multiple small frequent meals throughout the day to balance insulin and glucose. And now, I don't want to say clearly because it's not clear, but the latest research suggests that meal frequency is related to glucose dysregulation and metabolic issues. Okay, so with good intentions, were we wrong when we were speaking that narrative back then? No, we were doing the best we could based on the science, but that doesn't mean we're right now. And so I believe that what we should be saying is we think this is how things work, although that might change, and it might change. I mean, I give examples. There's been some funny studies that came out. The fifth quadricep was sort of identified. So it's another quad. It's quintuplets, I suppose. It's a little one, and the example that I've used in front of audiences with this is is if we're identifying new body parts, like we've been dissecting the body for a very long time. We have probably dissected millions of bodies, I'm guessing. And to all of us, and I use the example, like, let's say you go into your glove box or your glove compartment in your car and you find something in there. You're like, well, how long's that been in there? You know, like years, maybe. Like, how long has that razor been in there? I have no idea. That's like us going to the body and be like, wow, there's a new ligament in the knee. Wait, how's that? If we've been going into the body as often as we have, again, I mean, how many times? And to find or identify new body parts that have been there the whole time. How solid are we on hormones?
Yeah.
You know, how solid are we on, like, I mean, even worse, the nervous system or the immune system? And for people to make these bold claims about, oh, here's how the nervous system works. No, here's how we think it works to the best of our knowledge, based on the best of the science that we have right now. But please don't make claims about this. Please don't make this dogmatic, because you are misleading patients into thinking what health actually is. Oh, well, then I need to, you know, gargle and while I meditate, pray, hum, and, you know, chew gum all at the same time to stimulate my parasympathetic nervous system. Which, does that work? Sure. But anyhow, like that's my problem with the industry right now is there's not enough people, like what you just said, with humility. Like, I used to say this, boy, was I wrong. Mm-hmm. This is now the narrative that I'm speaking about. I may be wrong about this too. There's a really good chance that I am. And if I am, you'll be the first to know, because I don't want to mislead people. And I just feel like that doesn't exist. I mean, listen, it's I'm right, you're wrong. You know, iodine in high doses is good. And I'll show you all the research behind that. Someone else is like, are you kidding me? Iodine and even one drop will kill you. And I have all the references to prove it too. Right. And then what does that lead to? And you know this more than anybody, is patients that are just more confused than ever. Well, do I take iodine? Do I not? This person says it'll kill me. This person says I need to swim in it. Like, does that mean I should eat kelp? Because kelp I thought was healthy, but it has iodine. You know, like, no wonder people are confused. And I'll even add, it leads to, and nobody wants to admit this, crazy confused practitioners. Mm-hmm. We're not supposed to admit that we're confused, however. So patients will be like, I don't know what to eat anymore because this podcast says to eat this. This podcast says to avoid that. You know, I'm trying to follow paleo. So-and-so says beans are paleo. Someone else says beans aren't paleo. Am I supposed to eat beans or not? Mm-hmm. We aren't supposed to say we're confused about things. We're not supposed to say that we're ignorant or well, sure, you know. And so it leads to this very confused industry. Both. I mean,
if somebody's coming, if you're a practitioner, somebody's coming to pay you hundreds, thousands of dollars.
You need to know what you're talking about.
There's a huge pressure on you, I think, for most people to pretend like they have it all figured out. And you know, even if they don't know whether, hey, I don't know whether grains are bad or good, or beans are bad or good, or, you know, whatever food or whatever diet, or keto, if it's going to cause heart disease or if it's the cure for cancer and everything. There's so much of this that isn't known, and yet there's a pressure on people to pretend like they know.
Yeah.
So,
and it sucks for practitioners. I mean, there's a lot of unhappy imposter syndrome, confused practitioners who want to be able to tell the truth, but can't, for the reason that you said. You know, you're getting paid lots of money for someone to come and help you, and then there's all this pressure to help them.
And if you've been teaching somebody something for a long time, there's a psychological pressure on you to defend whatever thing that you've committed to for the last several years that you've been teaching people. Even if the science comes out showing that you're wrong, it's like, well, I still think it's right because I've helped this many people by prescribing this kind of diet. And so I'm still committed to this being the truth, even though the science does not agree with me.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be like someone coming out and saying like, oh, by the way, mitochondria is not responsible for energy. Mm-hmm. You'd be like, crap, there goes my whole business. You know, like,
yeah, pretty much.
Let's see, Golgi apparatus. Maybe that's the Golgi apparatus blueprint. You know, like that's going to be my next thing.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So a couple examples I thought of as you were talking. One was the appendix, you know, several years ago.
Right.
It was like, I forget how many years ago this came out, maybe 5, 10. But for decades, doctors were taking out people's appendix and they were like, oh, it's just a remnant of evolution. It serves no purpose. It has no function. And then like a few years ago, they discovered, oh, it actually is really important and it does something. And it's not just a non-functional remnant of evolution. And what it does is it's like a storehouse for the microbiome. So if you get poisoned by something, or in modern terms, antibiotics and things like that, the appendix kind of helps repopulate the microbiome. Another example is recently, maybe a year, 6 months, a year ago, there was a new discovery of, I forget the compound, calcitonin or some compound from bones that regulate the stress response. Do you remember seeing that?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, there's, to your point of discovering new body parts, it's like, whoa, we're discovering that the bones are a major factor in regulating our response to stress. Crazy stuff.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, that's an area I will say I dig deeply into, in those sort of obscure ideas, really just to prove that we don't know as much as we think we do. Mm-hmm. Like, so the stress response is the HPA axis and all these things, and there's, it's your perception, it's all these things, and then you're like, the bone does it too. We're like, oh crud. I just did a workshop. You'd actually probably like it. It was just a 1 hour workshop. It was how to identify, and I called it adrenal fatigue, but I feel about that, adrenal fatigue on a blood chemistry. And so I went through, and the first thing I did was basically say, it's not adrenal fatigue. Here's all the things that it probably is. The very first part of that presentation, however, it's a workshop. It's available. It's like 1 hour. It's super short. But I basically tried to show that we know a lot less than we think we do when it comes to this idea of stress in the first place. And you may or may not know some of these things, but cortisol is made outside of adrenal glands. It's made in a ton of tissues. And there's one study that it's a really intelligently designed study. It was really cool how they did this. But they found that extra adrenal, which means outside the adrenals, cortisol production is actually significant, because that's what a lot of people will say was, oh yeah, it's made in the brain and the skin and the thymus and all these other things, but it's not in appreciable amounts. This paper showed that in one group of people, and I won't get into the details of the study, it was about 50% of total circulating cortisol in the body was not from the adrenal glands. Well, that's a head scratcher. You might like this one too, that we have an HPA axis in our skin. And what researchers have found is, there's a few papers on this, that we literally, so like follow this. I'll slow down for this, because this one's like, oh, wait a minute, what? That we make CRH, ACTH, cortisol, and the receptors for all those, all in the skin, all by itself. Wow. No hypothalamus needed, no pituitary needed, no adrenal gland needed, no. You make the whole darn thing, the whole cascade from the HPA axis, all those analogs are made in the skin by itself.
Makes you wonder if it might be in other tissues as well.
Listen, but see, that's exactly my point. Yeah. Is because I'm here to tell you, well, so people say, well, what do you do with that? I have no idea, except to say that we don't know as much as we think we do.
Right.
So to get, Mr. and Mrs. Patient Smith in to say, well, we have this HPA axis and it's we don't know these things. And what I wish we would do as an industry is just with humility to say, I will do my darndest to help you in every which way that I possibly can. I've been doing this for a while. I have some decent success. I also have some epic failures. I mean, but I will try to help you, but not to have this, oh, it's all about the thyroid, it's all about the brain, or, your brain runs everything in the body. Really? In fact, here's a frustration for practitioners kind of on this note. And this encapsulates everything we're talking about, is you can go to a seminar on the brain, and after that weekend, it's just brain, and more brain, and papers to show, to back up everything they're saying. The brain runs everything. If you don't have a healthy brain, your gut won't work, your liver doesn't work, you can't detoxify, you're not happy, you have an altered stress response and all these things. And as a practitioner, or even as a patient, you listen to one of these people, you leave and you're like, wow, I need to focus on my brain. I need to take those, like serotonin supplements and dopamine supplements and just support my brain and take, a dozen brain supplements. Well, that doesn't usually help most people. And I know this. I see patients that are on like 30 supplements, self-prescribed supplements, because they've listened to all these different podcasts. And then the next weekend, you either go to another seminar or you listen to another podcast, and they talk about how the gut runs everything, and they show paper after paper after paper of how your gut dictates your brain response, dictates your brain function, dictates your liver and detoxification pathways, dictates your stress response, all because your gut. You're like, well, son of a gun, I need to work on my gut.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to the thyroid seminar and they paint the exact same picture. No, every cell of the body has a thyroid receptor on it. So if your thyroid sucks, then so does the rest of you. Guess what? Your gut's not going to work if your thyroid doesn't work. You can't detoxify and your brain's not going to work. You're like, and at some point, that's when you just throw up your hands. You're like, forget it. I'm just going to be like a farmer in Montana. I'm not even going to practice medicine anymore because it's, and you wonder why patients are confused, more confused than ever. And practitioners are more confused than ever, because you've heard this, you have to fix the adrenals before you fix the thyroid. Boy, you have to fix the gut before you fix the thyroid, or the microbiome, which is everybody's, golden cow right now, that let's fix the microbiome. 10 years ago, it was the genome. Before that, and if going back to the pellagra thing, if you can go in any point, and I'd say like in a span of about 5 to 10 years, there was a conversation that was happening at the time. And it was revolutionary, and it was novel, and it was new. And we thought we knew what we were doing, but boy, vitamin D is the savior. Before that, it was like, heavy metals, whatever it is. But we've been wrong every single time. It's never been the chalice. It's never been the gauntlet. It's never been the magic bullet. It's never been those things. And you want to know something? I don't think it ever is going to be.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I think, I'm curious if you agree with me.
I'm sorry to be so depressing too. I mean, I know this is incredibly depressing. People are looking to people like us for answers, but this is the honest truth.
Yes.
And I mean, if we get around,
I think people need to hear the honest truth about, for people who are not like us, who have been studying physiology for 20 years, who are not delving into the science for hours every day. There's a perception of, oh my gosh, like everything is known, by science. And I think for people to hear the limitations of what's known and get a sense of how much practitioners know and their own sort of the boundaries of their knowledge, and I think it's critical for people to understand that, and this historical context that you're presenting of, hey, we've been wrong about like pretty much all of these fads in the past, and all of this sort of the latest groundbreaking truth, as you were just outlining. And we still are, almost certainly. I mean, it's pretty much a guarantee. What I think is the bigger truth is, the best paradigm is systems biology, and and looking at all of these different players, because they're all important. The brain is important, the gut is important, the hormones, neurotransmitters are important, the microbiome is important, mitochondria are important. The immune system is important. Inflammation is important, and when people reduce things down, as you're just saying, oh, it's the thyroid, oh, it's the adrenals, oh, it's the gut, it's the microbiome, it's the toxins, it's whatever. This is pretty much guaranteed to be overly myopic and reductionist, and therefore wrong, because the body is fundamentally a spider web of interconnection of all these different systems. The problem with this paradigm because I've been trying to present it, as I think you have as well. The problem with it is it's way more difficult and less sexy for people, the average person, to wrap their head around. And it's way more sexy for someone to just say, hey, oh, it's your gut, it's your thyroid, it's your adrenals, and whatever, you just do this thing for your adrenals and boom, that's the big thing. That is a much simpler idea for people to wrap their head around.
1000%. There's that phrase of all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So every single patient that comes through your door is a food sensitivity. I'll put everybody on an elimination diet, and then you'll be good. Or I'm the adrenal specialist. And listen, I mean, I say I love this. I don't love this, but the number of people that I've talked with so they'll run a patient, they'll have a test run on them, and they'll come back negative. It all looks good. Oh, but my doctor still thinks that it's, so here they're running a lab to prove that somebody had a thing. It comes back negative. Like Lyme's a classic example. I'm not ripping on Lyme. Lyme seems to be legit. There's a lot of people that are very much suffering from that. So, but the number of people that I've seen that have, multiple negative Lyme tests, and I know this is going to offend somebody somewhere, but my doctor still thinks I have it, and that it's hidden. Okay, maybe, and I'm open to anything. This is a crazy universe of multiple possibilities of things. So that's certainly possible. But at some point, if you're that specialist with that hammer and all you see is a nail, maybe it's not the thyroid. Maybe it's not some hidden thyroid thing that the body just doesn't want to reveal, and maybe it is at the same time. Who knows?
So what do you think? I mean, you mentioned a few in passing here, but what do you think are some of the most egregious examples of where the natural health functional medicine community currently has something wrong? And what do you think is a better paradigm?
Oh, that's a big question. I'll just go ahead and summarize. And so here, I am afraid of myself doing the very thing that we've been talking about and looking for that one single solitary answer. And because it's sexy, because it's easy, and because you don't have to apply much thought to anything anymore. Something that I grapple with a whole lot is how is the power of one's, and I don't want to say the mind, because then all of a sudden that puts like certain labels on this, but it's our, call it mind or call it, and again, we love boxes, don't we? Like, oh, he just said spiritual self, so that means this. No, it doesn't. But is our perception of the world, our perception of our place in this world, like what our perception of the world even is in the first place, our definition of this world that we exist in, our definition of our place in this thing that we exist in. And I'm not trying to get esoteric or like existential. Our sense of purpose, our sense, like, are we lonely? I don't like to get into the happiness conversation, but do we have a sense of peace and contentment and joy in our life and ourself and all those, and do we feel like we have a purpose? And I say that because there are some, first of all, I have my own personal experiences with these things, but there's some very compelling studies out there even on this, in this area that I've done some stuff with, and there's some lectures somewhere on these things. But I'll give you an example. Vaccinations, that's a popular one right now, right? So there was a paper done on college-aged men, and what they did was they gave them a vaccination for the flu or whatever it was. And they did a subjective, there are what are called validated, which you know what that means, validated questionnaires available in the scientific literature that can identify sort of the like personality traits, things that you can't necessarily measure. And they gave them subjective questionnaires for this idea of like loneliness or social isolation or connectedness. And what they found was fascinating, that those that scored lower on that felt more isolated, less connected, more lonely, made less antibodies to this same vaccine that everybody else got. And the people that had more connectedness, less loneliness, more social circles, if you want to call it that, made more antibodies. Now these were, same gender, roughly the same age, same amount of the vaccine that was injected, and they made differing amount of antibodies potentially based on how they viewed themselves in the world that they live in. There was another really awesome one. So you're familiar with lipopolysaccharides. It's super highly inflammatory. And if researchers want to give you inflammation, they just give you a little shot of lipopolysaccharides, and it does the trick. Same deal. They had subjective questionnaires to identify how lonely somebody was. And this is a trip. See, this is where you stand back like, what do you make of that? I don't know. This is like, it's a bigger world. We hear that lipopolysaccharides are inflammatory. Where they come from? The gut. When you have leaky gut and there's holes in it and gram-negative bacteria, that whole story, right? And they're inflammatory. I can buy that. However, there was a study that looked at people, looked at their subjective loneliness score, and they injected them with lipopolysaccharides. And it turns out the more lonely somebody was when they had an injection of lipopolysaccharides, had more TNF-alpha, more interleukin-6, more of an inflammatory response to lipopolysaccharides than did people that were less lonely. And that, to me, then, to come back to your question, is huge, huge. Because then the question is, so you have an inflammatory condition right now. Well, let's say two people with rheumatoid arthritis, highly inflammatory autoimmune condition. If one of them has deep faith, has purpose, has love in their life, loves themselves, forgives themselves for any things, forgives other people, have peace and contentment in their heart, and they have a strong social network where of like maybe 3 people, the size doesn't matter, and feel connected, I would argue they might not even know that they have RA, quite honestly. And there's studies on these things as in relationship to food. Our hormones change in what we think that we just ate. Diabetics' glucose has changed in what time they thought it was. So I'm not saying that, because I preface this by saying, I'm afraid that I'm going to jump into that. Well, it's all mind, it's all perspective, it's all purpose, it's all connectedness, loneliness, happiness, and then would be good. What about somebody when they get an H. pylori infection? One could also make an argument that somebody who's lonely is more prone to an H. pylori connection. Yeah. So I think that is, to me, okay, so to answer your question, is we are not spending enough time on those areas. And what we're doing is we're slapping things on our wrist that tells us how we sleep and how many steps that we take. And the app that tells us if our macros are on track, because clearly that's important. And if we're off on our macros, then all hell's going to break loose. And we're probably going to die right there on the spot. And all these, it's gadgets and gizmos and apps. And I believe that practitioners, you said this earlier on, I was going to comment on this. Practitioners, we're all at fault. I'm not blaming a soul for any of this stuff. You made a comment earlier on about the two different people, the integrity, humility type practitioners, and the other ones that were kind of like the sleazy marketing. The people that are peddling the one size fits all diet or supplement for people can do it because people are looking for that. It's not the practitioner's fault. If people wouldn't buy into that, if they didn't want the shortcut, the silver bullet, then all those practitioners wouldn't even have a business, if that makes sense. So it's not those practitioners' fault. They are just preying on the fact that people want that. They don't want to, like, what would you rather do? Well, not you, I don't know, I'm speaking to the wrong person. But what would most people rather do? Track your macros or go deeply into who you are if you're lonely, have a purpose, if you hate yourself for certain things, or the deep, dark recesses of your life that you avoid because it hurts so stinking bad. You've practically repressed some of these feelings. But what we do is we have our phone and be like, oh, my macros are good and my sleep is good. And let's see, my radon in the areas, whatever it might be, I still long-winded, sorry, on your question, that those are all distractors. They're distracting us and they're keeping us away from the things that matter. And what matters is that I matter in this world that matters. And the people around me that matter, and do I have a purpose? If all that makes sense, I don't think that's the answer. I think that if more people went along those ways, they wouldn't have to follow the macros as well. And actually, like, I think that we are running the completely wrong direction. What was in the pursuit of health?
What was you just made me think of that. I think it's an Einstein quote. He said something like, not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. We have this obsession. We can do all these advanced lab, blood chemistry, and measure our hormones and our saliva and all, our neurotransmitters and our urine and our organic acids and yada yada yada. But you don't have any test that can measure your purpose in life or your self-love or your degree of community. And we have this obsession with looking at health purely from a biochemistry sort of perspective of nutrition and exercise and sleep, and I think there's a compelling case from the research that, if anything, the single most important factor in human health is actually community and social interactions, and purpose might be up there as well. And we don't have any tests that can measure it. And it's, you can't quantify it. You can't wear a little app, or a device on your arm that measures that.
Yeah, there are some subjective questionnaires that have been validated that look at things like loneliness, connectedness, and even purpose, quite honestly. And I have included those on my intake form when I see patients. And it's actually on a form for a program that I have for practitioners so that they can look in that too, because I have two comments on this for you. One is, if somebody scores, I'll say, poorly in those areas of happiness, loneliness, and purpose, then the rest of the questionnaire that looks at, glucose symptoms and serotonin symptoms and toxicity symptoms and all these things, it's like, all right, we're not going to talk about all this stuff because your highest scores are in these areas of, not feeling connected. And so that and those people, I think, are driving their ill health symptoms largely. On the other hand, if those scores are really, really good, somebody's happy and joyful and content, but man, they just feel sick or they're tired or whatever hurts, then it's biological and it's not so much psychological. The other thing I want to say too, and this gets into splitting hairs, which I'm not really ever interested in doing that much. When you're in a community, you have an innate purpose. Your purpose is that member of that community that serves a certain thing. And so like that community would not be that community without you. And so, I'm not disagreeing with you that community is it. I think it's one and the same. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, here's a question, and these are the things I like to talk. Can you have purpose but not be in a community? And so okay, let's say two different things. Somebody in a community that may or may not have a purpose, somebody with a purpose that doesn't have a community, which one is going to be quote unquote healthier? And I don't have the answer for it, but I think that's sort of a rhetorical question to sort of ponder. But I will say that in a community, here's another thing. If it's a legitimate community, Facebook's a community. Like, I don't want to belong to that community because that's a totally, I'm not going to comment on that. Or here's another one is,
I will just mention, I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma that came out on Netflix.
Yeah, my wife, we caught it.
Worth watching for everybody listening.
Totally. It is worth watching. I've seen some interesting commentaries on it too. Again, people can't really agree with or be happy with anything about stuff. but listen, this is another one, man. I'm sorry, I'm not articulate enough to get across the message that I continually try to get across. I wish that I could very succinctly. But it is that, this is what people do. And tell me I'm wrong. You hear that community is important. Community, and you look at all the studies on community and health and longevity and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's risk and all these things. So then what's the next thing? I need to join a community. I'm going to go join one. But you're joining one potentially for the wrong reason. That's a hedonic, selfish reason to join a community. Communities are supposed to be about the community, not you. So you just joined that community for selfish, I want to live longer and be healthier, so I'm going to join this community. That's hedonic. That's not eudaimonic. Eudaimonic is purpose. That's doing something for a greater good. I'm going to join this community because I want to better the people in this community. I don't want to get anything out of it. And so that to me is that subtle nuance where we as humans really screw this up. So it's like forcing yourself into community for the wrong reasons. And I guess, did we ever talk about the hedonic eudaimonic thing? I forget.
I don't think we did. No.
Okay. Well,
I have some commentary on what you just said, and I won't interrupt if you want to complete the thought.
This goes back to intent, which you said at the beginning, pursuing knowledge. And my whole point on that was, what's the intent of somebody pursuing knowledge passionately? Is it to write a book so that you're famous and you're in pictures on every billboard, or is it to help people? That's a very different intent. Why are you joining that community? Is it to live longer and feel healthier? That's selfish. It's the term's hedonic in the literature. There's eudaimonic, E-U-D. Eudaimonic is doing something for a greater good or greater purpose. I would submit that it's not belonging to a community, because I can go out and join a meetup group right now and go for hikes every weekend, and that's my community. But why am I doing that? It's the intent behind it. And I think that that's where people screw this up. I want to join a community for me. Sorry, dude. That is not health to me. Yeah. Is I'm going to join a community to participate in a community, to be a part, to help the other people of the community. And if I get helped by it, great. If I don't, no big deal. I'm there to serve. And I think that that's the big difference.
Yeah. I'm going to push back very slightly. It's not that I disagree. It's that I think I think it's not binary. So, and this might be something we disagree on, but I don't think humans are ever purely altruistic. I think that there's always a mix of, altruistic factors and self-serving factors at play almost in any human decision. I don't think that in the human condition, I don't think we can escape that. Maybe in very rare circumstances, someone takes a bullet for someone else or something like that. Even then maybe there's some secret wish of like, I want to be remembered as a hero,
Right,
you know?
right.
I think there's always at least a shred of self-serving. So I think my only disagreement with what you presented there is it's a bit of a catch-22 for people, for that reason, that I think it's hard for anybody to be purely altruistic and to do it,
Totally.
especially you're asking people to, not you, but we're asking people to sort of forget about the fact that it is good for you and that it is healthy and will lead to greater happiness for you to join a community. So it's like, yes, that's true, but forget that you know that, and which I think is not really possible to do. But I think the bigger issue is this. From an evolutionary perspective, humans existed in tribes. For most of evolution, we existed in small bands of people, 100, 200 people. And in those societies, there was a shared culture, a shared narrative story about, the story of creation and what our collective purpose is and what our purpose is as individuals. We share that culture, we share those traditions, we share those values, we share that common meaning and purpose. And you grow up in a society where everybody in that community knows you and you know them, and you are a member of that community where you serve a role and you are brought up in that context where all of those things are a given. And now we live in a context, a modern world, where we are separate from that. And yet now we're presented with this knowledge, hey, community is really important for you and for everybody else. So how do we come together to form some semblance of that community that used to be a given but is no longer a given, and do it in hopefully a way where you actually form some real community, real bonds, real shared culture, shared meaning, shared purpose? I think it's a big ask.
It's a huge ask. So I love what you said. Think about this. So in times past, you were born into the community. You didn't have to seek one out. You were already in one, and you either had to get along or else, that was your only option. But in those people, you said that we are not, it's impossible to be inherently completely altruistic except for a very few cases. Think about those people. Like, I would suggest that they, being a part of that community, living for the community, having a purpose within that community, was about as altruistic as you can get. It was probably not about themselves and being on, Better Huts and Gardens magazine because you built great huts for the community or whatever it was.
Certainly less materialism and narcissism, no doubt.
Well, right. So if you use that as, if you're to do this in a vacuum, you say, well, okay, well, those were human beings that were existing in that way that really cared very little. And they probably were little bits of selfishness, of course. But that, I would say, is human beings being altruistic in a community. And now what we're doing is we're hearing that community is really good. And so then we're forcing community and thinking that I will be better off if I join a community. And what I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is I think that that's the wrong motive. I think that if a community is going to form, it's going to form some, I think we talked about this before. Like first of all, I have, 5 kids and my wife, and it's kind of our own community of sorts. And my in-laws are pretty close too. I suck with communities. I'm a social hermit. I've always been a social hermit.
Yeah, you and me both.
Get along well with people. I want to. That's why, actually, you want to know something really funny, is in the literature, loneliness kills. Loneliness is on par with hypertension, alcoholism, smoking, obesity. And if you're lonely, you have a risk of mortality as much as those things. And I always tell people, like, well, if that's the case, I'd rather be, smoking, drinking, obese, and having a good time and die rather than be lonely and die. If you have the same chances of dying, at least you're having fun with some Ben and Jerry's instead of, sitting by yourself lonely in a corner. But with the literature that I've looked at, a sense of purpose trumps loneliness. So you could be lonely, but have a sense of purpose, and that the mortality risks of loneliness don't exist if you have a purpose.
Wow.
And so then I take it back and I say, I don't want to sit there and say this is the one thing, because I don't think we can, and I might be wrong someday, but purpose seems to be a very big component. And purpose then, when you look at it, has to do with, like, why are you here? Like, what is it? What do you wake up for every day?
Mm-hmm.
Those are hard questions. And this is what I was getting back to is, would you rather ponder why the heck you're here and why you're waking up in the morning and what motivates you during the day? Or would you rather track your sleep, your apps, and your steps and your macros? That doesn't hurt to look at those things. It hurts when I'm like, oh, my carbs are too high for the day. Nuts. I'll do better tomorrow. Or like, look at I woke up too many times last night, whatever. It hurts to look at others. That is a hard question to seriously ponder. And it hurts even more to realize you don't have an answer. Crap, I don't have a purpose. I must suck.
Yeah.
So anyways.
I wonder, what's coming to my head right now is I think to some degree those things are connected.
They totally are.
Purpose and loneliness. There's probably a point at which they can be separated out, where someone can have strong purpose but be lonely. But I think in general, maybe this is too broad of a brushstroke, but I think in general, a sense of purpose is very much intertwined with connectedness to the world around you. Because if it's not, if it's you in isolation, then your purpose might be, well, I'm a hoarder and I just want to acquire, more stuff to fill my house with. I can't stop, compulsively buying stuff, but I'm really passionate about that. And I think that's my purpose. It's just to hoard lots of stuff. I mean, it's possible to have a purpose that's that's a kind of purpose that doesn't serve anyone. and maybe not even yourself to a strong degree, at least doesn't serve you in a way that leads to better health or happiness, but it's still some kind of semblance of a purpose.
So, but that's that other term is eudaimonic. That's serving a higher good. And so purpose by itself, you're totally right. My purpose is to get up and, murder baby sheep. That's a horrible purpose. So, but no, a purpose for a greater good, I think is if we're going to define it as a purpose for some greater good other than yourself.
Yeah.
And so that is more of a giving and sort of servant attitude. And listen, but like, what is much of the health, nutrition, whatever you want to call it, industry is it's very selfish. Let me take a picture of the food that I'm eating and post it on Instagram to make you all feel bad about the food that you're eating or can't eat because you're too busy or don't have or don't know how to cook these meals. That's not self-serving. I should say that's not other serving. That's self-serving. It's look at me, look at my physique, look at how healthy I am, look at the food that I'm eating, rather than like, what can I do to serve other people? And I've looked deeply into the literature as much as I can on this. I've interviewed some of the researchers that have done the original research on these things. And it seems to me, as far as I can tell, I mean, you asked what, egregious errors the industry is making. I don't think this is the answer, but I think this is missing tremendously. I don't think it is how much and again, first of all, this is a very morose conversation. I realize, and I'm aware of that, but I don't know how else to do it. I guess I feel young. I will say that I'm getting old. And I feel like these are cranky conversations to have. So maybe I'm older than I realize. I don't know. I have glasses before. I haven't talked about glasses. So I'm apparently some things are starting to fail on me, which is totally cool. I love aging. Aging is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm having a grand old time right now. Anyways, but I believe that this one area of purposeful engagement, purposeful for a higher purpose, higher good, something other than yourself. That's what it comes down to. And so going back to that pursuit of knowledge, is it a pursuit of knowledge for yourself, or is it a pursuit of knowledge for others? You said that loneliness and purpose are intertwined. I would slightly disagree in the sense that you can have somebody, let's say somebody's trying to, find the cure for cancer. And that is their purpose. And they're just a lab rat scientist. They go in every single day, and that's their purpose. And they're getting close, and they're going to do it. They don't talk to anybody. They're not married because nobody likes them, because all they do is talk about this cancer research. Like, that is purpose.
So in this scenario, there's a sense of connectedness to humanity, but not necessarily in one's individual sort of personal life. They may not have much human connection.
And this is why I don't like definitions, because when you say connectedness, that you think conversation, but not necessarily. If you're stuffed in a lab somewhere really close to cracking the code that will help humanity, whether you get, by the way, acknowledgement or awards for this or not. Like that is, to me, truly altruistic. Like but the altruism, the sense, the selfishness, which you said earlier, comes from the self-satisfaction that you get knowing that you helped all these people, whether or not you get the award or the Peace Prize or the Nobel Prize or whatever it is that sense of like gratification of I just helped all these people. And that is somewhat self-serving, but that's a really good self-servingness other than the selfish garbage that's going on today in the industry. So,
you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm trying to summarize to finally answer your question. That's where I think this industry is wrong. We're focusing on diet. We're focusing on all these outside things. What supplements can I take? What food can I eat? What exercise can I perform? What was the best kind of exercise? You know, all these other things. When I think what we really need to be doing is this idea of connectedness, not conversations, community, which you don't have to go out on a hike every weekend to have a community, like not to define community that way, but to have that, like, why are you here? And why are you here? You know, do you love yourself? Can you accept yourself for who you are? And I would be willing to bet that people experiencing certain symptoms, and I've seen this in patients actually, would just disappear. Or they wouldn't be as severe, or if you had them, they wouldn't matter. Yeah. My knees hurt like the dickens, but you know what? I'm happy, I'm joyful, I have a purpose, and I don't need to take whatever supplement for that. Anyhow, that's my final answer.
Yeah. Just randomly popped into my head a personal story from 10 years ago or so. I was sitting in a restaurant kind of on the beach with my mom and my aunt, her sister. And all of a sudden we start hearing some screams from the water. And we're kind of looking out, and we see a guy out there who's kind of appears to be kind of swimming, maybe struggling a little bit, and then kind of scream every once in a while and goes silent. And then eventually, and it's kind of like not just a sort of happy, playful scream, but like kind of a shriek of terror. And so we're looking out, kind of trying to see if we can identify where this is coming from and what's going on. There's a bunch of people on the beach between the restaurant and, where we are and this person. Nobody seems to really be panicking or doing much about it. Then the shrieks kind of get louder and more severe. And eventually we realize this guy basically can't swim, and he's caught in some kind of rip current, and he's drowning, and he's screaming for help. And, there's 200 people on the beach between me and the guy in the water. And so my mom starts freaking out and like, oh my gosh, the guy's drowning, somebody do something. And she starts crying, my mom starts like crying as we're sitting in this restaurant. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not going out there. There's like 200 people way closer to this guy than I am. And so my mom starts crying and crying and crying. And then she yells at me, Ari, do something. Yeah. And so I, climb down this wall from this restaurant. I, run down the beach, Baywatch style. I'm like taking off my shirt as I'm running, down the beach, slow motion, boobs bouncing everywhere.
Wow. That's never happened to me. You're lucky.
And I go in the water and I pull this guy out and I save him.
That's great.
And, but it was such an interesting thing. Like I didn't even feel like it wasn't a purely altruistic thing for me. If anything, I just didn't want to sit there and watch my mom cry and deal with the fact that she was telling me to go do something and I wasn't doing it. Like I would have felt bad about myself had I not gone. Sure. You know what I mean? So just as an example of this weird sort of mix of something that, I don't know, maybe appears very altruistic on the surface, but was really about me just pleasing my mom and not feeling bad about myself that I didn't do something when I could have,
Okay. But part of it, you just said it was pleasing your mom. I mean, that's altruistic, dude. I mean, like you made it sound like you were doing it to avoid the pain through it in yourself. And listen, that's a huge motivator. We all know that. But I mean, as you were saying that, I was like, he did this for his mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't really thought about it.
Which again, getting back to the beginning of this conversation, is it's about our perspective of the world that we live in and our place in it. And there's different perspectives to the same story. And my question to people are like, what's your story? What's the story you're telling yourself about the world that you live in or your place in it or who you are. And can you change that story? And we can, even though we're not willing to, or sometimes it's hard and we don't know how. And believe me, I'm not saying this is easy. I've never said this is easy. It might be one of the hardest things anybody ever does.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's simple and easy are two different things.
Yeah.
Like deadlifting is a very simple, right? You're disappearing on me, right? I saw that fly buzzing around you there. Deadlifting is a simple exercise, right? You just pick something off the ground. It doesn't mean it's easy. And so this is also something that it's simple in that we just have to change the conversation that we're having, realize certain things, but it's not easy. It's really hard.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, you name the supplement that somebody could take that will have that same impact on their body, or what diet they could follow, or what exercise program. And what I see are these patients that are chasing the next diet. Well, I tried this diet, but I got to do this. Or I'm eating 50 carbs a day. What happens if I eat 40? Will that make a difference? No. At some point, it's not about the food that you're putting in the mouth. It's not the kind of exercise you're doing. It's not the supplements that you're taking or not taking. It's none of those things. It's not about the gadget. It's not about the app. It's not about the Fitbit, Bite, or whatever garbage is out there nowadays. It's not about that. And it's not about that because the next thing they try, they think it's going to make them healthy and happy, and it doesn't. It's okay. They're going down the wrong path. Sorry.
Hey there, this is Ari. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more from Dr. Walsh or check out his work or his programs, you can go to the website metabolicfitnesspro.com. Also, this is just part 1 of this podcast. So there is a part 2 coming out next week on a bunch of cool topics related to functional medicine, blood testing, flaws in the functional medicine and natural health paradigms, kind of the biggest myths and fallacies that are out there. And that podcast addresses a whole bunch of interesting topics related to that. So I hope you'll tune into that. And thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next one.